Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.
You are saying that the economy is in ICU, and Manish Sabarwal says that no, it's in rehabilitation therapy. What is the real thing? I mean, are things so bad?
Harish, no, the only way to get a good reading is to look at the indicators, right? I mean, if you look at the basic numbers, and these are macro numbers. I mean, I think it's important not to focus on any kind of one sector or the other, because you can always find some sectors. But if you look at the macro numbers, say on consumption, investment, trade, taxes, these four broadly, I mean, they're all either this year in negative growth territory or barely positive growth territory. Non-oil import growth is about -5%. IIP, capital and infrastructure, minus, I think, depending on how you measure it, one is -5, the other is -10%. Non-oil export growth is also negative. GST, and if you put together GST and direct taxes, it's about nominal about 3.6%, which is basically real is zero. So if you look at these numbers, I mean, and then you look at it from a comparative perspective, does it resemble the 2002 slowdown? 2002 slowdown, GDP growth was 4.5, but all these numbers were in actually positive, fairly positive growth territory. You look at 91, there seems to be a greater resemblance to the, obviously it's not 91 in terms of the macro. Macro is very sound, foreign exchange is sound, current account sound. But in terms of the real indicators, it's like resembles much more in 91, 92 we had growth of 1.1%. So if you look at these objective numbers, it seems like that. Then of course, if you look at the electricity generation numbers over the last 28, 29 years, I mean, never have you seen almost zero growth in electricity. I mean, think of it, for a country that's still where energy access is so poor, to think that energy generation and energy demand is going to be in negative growth, close to negative growth territories, is unheard of. So I think that all these objective indicators point to something very serious and something that we haven't seen for a very long time. Now, the other thing, then you say, look, okay, this is the past. Maybe the future is actually very bright, or things are turning around. So that's kind of Manish's argument. And let me just say 3 or 4 things about the outlook, which kind of one should think about carefully, right? One is, all this slowdown itself creates a lot of stress, right? I mean, if your nominal GDP growth is going to be 4-5% and interest costs are like 12, 13, 14%, how can there not be stress? You're not going to generate the earnings to repay the thing. Same thing on the fiscal side, you no longer have the space. So even the outlook, so the current conditions themselves create stress, which are going to make things a little bit worse. Then, of course, we know that the financial system is just completely jammed, right? If you look at the credit crunch to the commercial sector that all of you have seen, it's like you can almost feel the crunching of gravel on the thing. It's gone from some 20 lakh crores to virtually zero over the space of 8-9 months. So I think that if you look at all these indicators, and you look at the outlook, it seems like unless we do. And then the other thing, of course, is that, you say you've run out. Also, remember, the short-term bullets you have are monetary and fiscal policy to get you out of that. We've seen monetary transmission, Sunil's also written about this, completely gone. These cuts are not being passed through. And of course, the fiscal space is now completely evaporated, because if you look at the true deficit, last year, I think we ended up, even if you look at the CAG numbers and put all this together, you're close to 9%. That's also JP Morgan estimate. This year it's going to be, unless we get some massive thing on privatization, it's going to be, because we know growth slows down, all the revenues collapse and everything. So this year the fiscal situation is going to be, even more challenging. So conditions are objectively, the indicators looking grim. That itself creates more stress. Your instruments, short-term bullets, are completely gone. And then, exports are down, and, that's another thing. Just focus on investment for a second, right? For some time we did public investment. Then in the 2000s, we did this private PPP type investment. Now that PPP model is completely discredited. So if you say, how is private investment going to come back, especially in infrastructure, under this overhang of the 4C problem and all the policy and regulatory uncertainty that all of you have written about? I mean, I think we'll have to do a lot if we have to be realistically hope that things are going to turn around.
You are saying that this is as bad as 91, but 91 it was very clear. I mean, there was 1 month of foreign exchange reserves. They were the UK. This time, I mean, what is the problem?
Yeah, exactly.
There's no problem. There's absolutely no supply side problem. So what is this?
Slow down. Yeah, you wrote about the fact that in India we are used to crises that are triggered by the 3 Fs. Food, fiscal, foreign exchange. Those are macro crises, So that we're used to, we recognize it and we can respond to it. This time around, it's a very unusual situation because we've had a slow bleed beginning just after the global financial crisis. The whole financial sector has been deteriorating, exports and investment have been deteriorating for a very long time. And I think essentially the metaphor because it's very puzzling, nothing dramatic has gone wrong, but it's been a slow bleed for a very long time. And the metaphor that comes to mind for me is the whole frog and the boiling water, right? If it's boiling slowly, just temperature goes up little by little, the frog doesn't know what's going on. And that's what's been going wrong, happening for almost a decade now. And sorry, I mean, I don't want to hammer this point. And I think the fact that we've been our measurement has been out of kilter and over optimistic has fed this sense that maybe things are not too bad. And so a combination of this, the measurement misleading us to some extent, and the fact that it's a slow bleed, that it's a situation that we're unfamiliar with. That's why we've remember, all of us have, I don't want to point any fingers. It sprung on us as a kind of surprise for all of us because, remember, until 7-8 months ago, saying world's fastest growing emerging market economy, and suddenly how do we go from here? And I think it's because it's been unfamiliar, it's a long, slow bleed, it has to do with the financial system, and it's eaten away, and that's why I think it's happened as severely as it happened in a way that we've not been able to recognize so easily, because it's not a dramatic, foreign exchange has gone or inflation perks up, fiscal deficit out of control. It's been a long bleed which has affected the real sector above all. And so, you go down, and I think that's where so in a sense, I think we need to have, it's like a collective social cognition apparatus has been unprepared to recognize this kind of problem, what we call the twin balance sheet crisis, And one last point I want to say is that the fact that the balance sheet crises extract growth costs is well known from the work of Carmen Reinhart and Ken Rogoff. But I think for us it's been unfamiliar. Now, I think the pushback can come say, we had a big problem in the early 2000s with the banking system as well. But in the Q&A, I can explain why this is very different from that as well, and that's why I think there's a problem. Yeah.
But when does this actually start? Do we see this becoming the familiar thing that we've talked about? When will we have a foreign exchange crisis? When will we have that kind of crisis?
So
I just think it's a slow bleed, but at some point it has to show up in those macro numbers that you're talking about.
See, supposing you have slow growth for a very long time, right? Our current account is not going to deteriorate. Current account is exchange, and slow growth can also mean that inflation may come down because, I know there's a temporary blip up and things, but that's also down. So I think the two places where it will manifest itself are the real sector, jobs, whatever, corporate layoffs, corporate things, the real sector, and in the fisc, it's going to show up in the fisc as well. Because already we can see states are cutting back, center doesn't have money. So this growth kind of slowdown is not going to manifest itself in conventional, crises going to the fund, none of that. But it's going to, at least two places where it's going to be, and these are going to be slow. By definition, it's going to be slow, and that's why it's not going to be dramatic and therefore a bit more challenging for policymakers.
You talked about a twin balance sheet crisis and this being, a classic example of the way that is playing out. Twin balance sheet crises typically take 10, 12, even more years for countries to come out of it. So, to what extent and where would you blame the government in not taking action? In the sense that even if you had the dream team, which is Manmohan Singh, Chidambaram, perhaps you as the chief economic advisor, if you had that dream team, given the fact that you had a deep crisis, you had a problem, then the government had to do IBC, you had to do RERA, some of these things that the government has done had to be done. So where exactly would you fault this government? Where did it go wrong?
See, firstly, of course, I think we have to say that the twin balance sheet has become a four balance sheet problem, right? We now have NBFCs and real estate sector, so that's kind of making the problem worse. See, I think that, look, I don't want to get into blame games because I think, exactly. I think clearly the origin is the fact that, all this excessive lending took place, right? And from about 2010, by the way, I think one of the heroes in this episode, and who's done the nation a great service, is Ashish Gupta of Credit Suisse. The House of Debt report that first came out, 2010, 2011, whatever. I think that's when I think the problems should have been start to be addressed, right? You see that, because remember, between then and almost 2015, 16, we were in denial about the true state of the problem. In my book, there's a chart about what the RBI says is the NPA and what Ashish was saying all along. It's only after AQR1 that we kind of, started even publicly acknowledging. So therefore the fault is not just this government, it's the government, regulator, everyone is to blame. So I think that's the first thing that we were in denial for a very long time. We were second, I'll be completely honest. Second, I think that, Sunil, you will remember that when we first did the balance sheet crisis analysis, we had this debate about the bad bank. We said, things are whatever. But I think there were two things in my view that kind of delayed action, as it were, right? One is, the numbers were not bad. You say, no, you must do it, but then say, no, growth is 6.5%, 7.5%. What's the problem, right? So that's why, for me, the measurement thing has not been about wanting to say that I'm right, but it's taken such a toll of everything. Just to give it, just as an aside, if we had known growth was only 4% in our compensation, we would have done 4 plus 4% inflation, 8 is nominal GDP growth, and then whatever 1, 2 thing. Another example, we said 14% because we said, we're growing at 7, whatever, add 4, 4.5, you kind of, ballpark, mota, you get that. So coming back to this, growth is what's the problem. We were still not come clean on the magnitude of the problem. And then we had this big debate about the bad bank. And there, my own assessment is that, because remember the bad bank discussion we initiated in 2015 or so, right? But then the problem was that, the government was new and it was still quite vulnerable to the criticism of Sood Boot Sarkar. So at that point, any executive-led process was not going to be easy. And that's why I think the government did the IBC, for which it deserves a lot of credit. I mean, I think it should really be recorded that, for the first time we have something where at least, we've made some progress on this. So that kind of delayed this. But then you see what happened was, I think all credit to the IBC, but then a combination of actually prolonged slow growth and then the second TBS have made matters even worse. So I think that if you were really honest about understanding, it begins with the inattention beginning 2010, the underballing of the problem until 2016, the measurement saying what's the problem, the initial bad bank discussions happening, but saying, let's not do this because, remember, if you're vulnerable to the charge of Sood Boot Sarkar, then resolution which requires some write-offs are going to be very difficult to do, and that's why we had to do the IBC.
In the first economic survey, the global forecast, You painted a fairly rosy picture.
Yeah.
Cusp of cusp of double-digit growth is probably what you used. Was there a genuine estimation error, or was that miscommunication nonsense?
No, absolutely not. I think when in 2014, I think all of us had this sense of this was a real moment in time where the oil prices are down. There's a big political mandate, and the sense that the government could address many of these issues. I think there's a sense of genuine optimism, which is what I conveyed. I mean, I generally don't write things that I don't believe in, and we felt, and you can see over my 4 years, the surveys, as someone documented the 4 surveys over time, they become, more and more sober. And that was in keeping with, the way things evolved.
Written away the oil bonanza, and, progressively, even on crises that have unfolded subsequently, the NBFC crisis, it was almost very clear that banks were not lending. NBFC were doing their heavy lifting on the consumers lending side. Why was it such a big surprise that only when it unfolded, or you mentioned the House of Debt report. Now all that was out in the public domain. It's only after INFS went belly up that the NBFC problem was recognized. Were we late on the ball on all of this?
So two things. One is your oil question, right? To analyze the last 8-10 years, you have to be able to explain a long-term slowdown, the fact that it didn't completely collapse, then the fizz that happened with the second credit boom, and then the collapse. So in a sense, there are like 3 phases going on here. And part of the reason things didn't collapse earlier on was because of the oil price. Oil prices did provide a temporary cushion both for the fisc and for consumption, and that's why when exports and investment collapsed, the economy still did whatever 3, 4, 5%, whatever, depending on your measurement, because oil things did. So your point about, look, when and this is something that is, let me tell you one thing that I was surprised by, and then your question about the NBFC lending, right? So, look, we all have views on demonetization, no need to go over them. But I think for me, one of the surprises was that post-demonetization was when the credit boom happened. Post-demonetization, and of course it was partly due to the demonetization because the money came back to the banks, the money came back to the mutual funds, they financed the NBFCs, and that's when we had the credit boom. Now, so then when the current credit bubble burst, right, the question is why? Why? And this comes to your question. All episodes like this of serious stress, right, when some major event happens, they require a trigger and they require some fundamental kind of unsustainable Ponzi scheme kind of stuff, right? The trigger was ILFS. Now, ILFS is catastrophic fault of regulation by the regulator. I mean, how can this behemoth, 90,000 crores, escape all the notice of regulators and come out of, like a googly? So that, I think, is just absolute failure of the system, especially the regulator. It's the regulator who is supposed to spot these things. So I think, we need to do, but of course, it's not just ILFS. We've had a series of things. So part of response to Sunil's question as well is, one of the things that went wrong was regulation was, seriously flawed. I mean, we've had so many things, and I think the regulator and the regulatory system needs to think. Part of that included when the NBFC started lending, there should have been much stricter oversight of how much they were lending and where they were lending, right? Let me give you one example. When the banks got some of the money, I'm not saying this is but this is one small example. When the banks got the money, instead of them lending directly to real estate, they lent to the NBFCs to lend to real estate. Why? Because the risk weights attached. So if I make a loan and make it to an NBFC, the risk weight for that is much lower than if I make it directly real estate. Now, these were things that the regulator should have spotted, right? So I think that regulatory oversight has been, absolutely. That's one lesson we've learned, is that we need to, fundamentally overhaul the regulatory system. But that's easier said than done, because there's no, anyone who says he can really fix this regulatory system is, talking nonsense, because there's a model like, where the regulator is inside the RBI, then you have in the UK they tried the regulator outside the central bank, even that didn't work. So it's not a kind of structural fix. It has to be something where, the regulator is genuinely inspired by this only the paranoid survive kind of mentality, and their attitude is, my job is just to find out where the mess in the system is, where it's going to happen. You need that kind of overzealous thing here.
One, as per your assessment, where are we in this slowdown trough right now? I mean, it's been a long period now, but where are we now? Do you see it further aggravating, or do you see it now be coming out of it?
On the trough, let me say, three things. One, I don't think anyone can say it's going to come out in 3 quarters, 4 quarters, whatever, right? One. But two things I can say. One, my sense is that things have to get worse before they get better. I think that I think is, I say that based on the fact that what I spoke about, the pincer between, the fact that slow growth itself creates its own complications. Corporate stress increases, fiscal stress increases, so that leads to further, cutbacks. So things are probably going to have to get better before they get worse. And the third thing I would say is that, how quickly we come out is completely dependent upon what we do. I mean, of course, the external environment is there, but, if you take measures that can, increase confidence, start fixing the financial sector, the data thing, agriculture, whatever. I mean, it's going to depend on what we do. So it's, the thing is, it's kind of in our hands to some extent, in the government's hands. And I think that's why I think, but actual timing, one cannot say anything. Yeah.
You said that this belated recognition of NPA crisis cost us dearly. So, do you think the RBI under Raghuram Rajan could have initiated the AQR, before?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think the first, the fact that it was done deserves, I think, credit. But I think yes, I do think it could have been done earlier, because I do think that, about, as I say, from about 2011-12 to about 2015, I mean, for a lot of time, we were just doing extend and pretend. All these schemes, S4A, S3AA, they were all extend and pretend schemes, denying the problem. And so I do think we recognize the problem later than we should have. And that's why I think that, that's...
Subbarao was the governor in 10-11, right?
Huh?
Subbarao was the governor.
Yeah, beginning, yeah. No, I mean, whatever. It's just, I don't want to get personal at all. I think just...
I'm just saying because it's wearing around to Raghuram Rajan in the bad guy.
Yeah. No, that's why.
What was Wiley Reddy doing?
Yeah. See, that's why I don't want to blame anyone. That's why I said should have started much earlier, right? See, my kind of discomfort at this stage is there's a kind of, the banks are okay, we need to do it for the NBFC. And I don't have the confidence to say, because, yeah, exactly. Because the NBFC thing rebounds, because banks lend to the NBFCs quite a bit. So I think we need that systemic thing. See, because remember that in politics and political economy, that if collectively the country thinks the problem is small, the urgency to solve it is small.
On a political level, this government and this party seems to have greater trust of every political agent, so every voter. So they have increased the number of votes they got. So the political trust is going up, but here is a finance minister who does major announcements and the economic agents doesn't seem to be impressed. Even minus the government and the ruling party in general. So Amazon and Flipkart are delivering remote corners. So there is more trust. People, firms are ready to send their goods hoping that they will get back the money. So it's a complete dichotomy. So why the economic agents are not trusting the government? Apart from the data is one issue. That is, but other than that, there are many announcements that they are doing, and it's
Corporate
not
tax rate,
it's not being trusted. So what is the problem? Is it the problem of the government or the economic agents?
Come to the economic side, right? Remember that we've always had for many years, for 10, 15, 20 years, we've had what I've called this 4C problem, right? That, both public officials and private sector, they have been, there's been a kind of dampening effect because you fear that there's going to be 4C activity. So, and remember that, in turn that comes from what? We had a series of, corruption scandals. So government, the people's economic agents' faith in government also kind of fell. So that relationship has been, I think, impaired for a very long time. So it's not just this government, it's been impaired for a very long time, beginning with all the corruption scandals. So in a sense, like, we are now in a situation where this is the cumulative legacy of many, many years, almost decades, and it's not going to be easy to undo that. I think we should stop making the problem worse, but it's not going to be easy to solve. So that's why when I say, you announce tax cuts, obviously the response is going to be contingent upon, the fact that whether you think, if you invest based on these tax cuts, is that safe? Is that liable to think? Now, Sunil has been writing very, at least on Twitter and on thing, very eloquently about the whole, the change in the policy uncertainty, how the regime keeps changing. Agriculture was a great example, right? Prices go up, controls, prices come down, tariffs, and so the farmer has no kind of a certainty about the price regime. And I think that is a problem. I think we need to have a situation where there's much more policy certainty and much more friendliness.
3 things that you would like to see in the budget, either in terms of tax announcements or any changes in any of the existing taxation laws across.
Unfortunately, on this one, I have much stronger views on 3 things that should not be in the budget than that should be in the budget. First, absolute essential is, budgetary accounting. Let's revamp and this is the CAG has said this. Is not some outsider saying this. This is the government itself saying this. So, budgetary accounting. Back to coming. It's like an AQR for that. I think, and Shobhana, this is a very, very important thing. I don't want to underestimate that. Second, I think that no additional fiscal stimulus based on the honest accounting. That is, that if we say whatever central government budget is, I don't want to put a number. I think what I would say is that don't add to the stimulus, but don't also have some dramatic fiscal consolidation, which is not going to be realistic. I think just the sense of honest accounting and keep it kind of. Because remember, when growth is weak, you can, this has been part of the problem, right? We've been trying somewhat ambitious consolidation when I think the underlying reality has not been consistent with that. So let's get the, accounting clean. Let's have kind of modest and realistic ambition on the targets. No individual income tax cuts. Absolutely not. If you want to, I can explain why, or you don't want me to. One, this is again kind of, if you want to boost, let's say you want to boost consumption, I don't think we should boost consumption in order to boost growth, because no country grows long run based on consumption. You want to boost consumption because you want to boost consumption. But then if you want to do that, the individual income taxpayers are the top 5% of the population. If you really want to boost consumption, the bottom 95. So I think if you want to boost consumption, you should have something like a UBI, DBT, extend PM Kisan. There are many, many variations on that. So no raising GST rates. See, my view and what I said in today's piece, and a slight aside, is that I think GST is actually, let me stick it out there, GST performance revenue performance is not bad at all. It's actually quite good. Okay?
Given the economy.
Given the economy and given the massive rate cuts that took place towards the end of last year. And if you were to say that the economy is weak, it's probably weaker than we think it is, and factor in the tax cuts, I think it's not. So this is again a case where people say, oh, there's something going wrong with administration, buoyancy is down. It could all just be again a measurement issue, right? I mean, if you think GDP growth is whatever, so I think GST is getting too much thing. However, what I do think we should do not today, when the economy recovers, maybe 6 months, whatever, then we have to have the bigger reassessment of GST and get back to something close to what I recommended in my report, or there are variances you don't have to follow. I feel that there are no real magic short-term bullets. I feel that the budget is not, should not kind of aim to do too much surprise. I think the policy announcement that should accompany it should be much more along the lines of what I've said. The bad bank, IBC, agriculture, data, power. The power sector. I think once more requires serious, because now remember, it's not just thermal but renewables also, which are now coming under stress. So I think, or put it differently, this is a budget not for anything dramatic or surprise on the tax and the deficit. Keep that steady, do your thing. It's much more because it's a structural problem. You need structural remedies, and we've run out of the short-term bullets.
Do you support the cuts in corporation tax? Because for some 100 years we are not going to see any investments, and the benefits have gone only to the HDFC banks, Nestle, GSK, who don't need any benefits, and mostly FMCG companies who are not going to do one naya paisa of capex, because in any case most of them outsource, including a Hindustan Unilever. So why did we give away 1.45 lakh crore for nothing? And on the personal income tax, the top is fine, but what about people paying 30% at 10 lakh? An individual pays at 10 lakh 30% and a corporate doesn't pay?
I think India, in terms of personal income taxes, is a country where there are much fewer taxpayers than there should be. I mean, the aim should be to get more and more taxpayers into the net. We know that from a long-run investment point of view, India's tax rates were far too high. I think we just have to accept that, and so on. The tricky thing is the following, right? The tricky thing is the following. On the one hand, I think it was a desirable long-run structural reform, and the timing was dictated by whatever it was, but it was desirable long-run reform. The problem in all these situations is what is called, the theory of the second best. We're in a second best world. So, in a first best world, if everything is good, a corporate tax cut is going to elicit a decent response. In a second best world, you do one thing, 4 other things are not in place. This may not elicit the investment things that you. So it's a kind of a, and I can see both sides of the argument. I can see someone who says this is a necessary condition because everything else is so. In fact, some would say everything else is so kind of deterrent of investment that actually you may even need to do more to attract the investment. There are others who will say, no, whatever you do, the binding constraint is elsewhere. So this is a giveaway in things. So I think this is actually a classic case of a policy dilemma, which you can honestly argue it both ways. My only thing would be that given that that's been done, I think we need to do all the other things to kind of make these corporate tax cuts